On this Aircheck episode, we catch up with former FM rock and satellite radio programmer Gregg Steele.
Gregg shares lots of great tales from his days at the legendary KNAC, working with Bob Coburn on Rockline, his transition to satellite radio, and a birthday moment with Robert Plant.
Here we go.
Welcome to Aircheck, Season 3, a podcast about radio's personality. From radio personalities, managers, consultants, owners, and your most humble hosts. From Philadelphia, Rich DeSisto and Paul Kelly.
I'm Rich DeSisto.
And I'm Paul Kelly.
On this Aircheck session, we're proud to have with us one of the greats of rock radio programming.
A Midwest guy who got his start there and became more of a coastal guy.
He rocked the San Diego market.
101 KGB-FM. 1965. LBJ pledges to build the Great Society.
Communist guerrillas attacked 2 outposts near Saigon.
To the Batmobile. Sorry about that.
Harvard professor Timothy Leary advises people to drop out, turn on, tune in.
Any luck, Barney? Not yet, Fred.
1965. 101 KGB-FM is Rock and Roll Classic.
Los Angeles.
The station that helps you relax and unwind after a busy day.
How about if I just kick your ass?
Southern California's only real ass kicker.
I could use a good ass kick, I'll be very honest with you.
Miami.
We're not like any radio station in South Florida. We play rock music. 94.9 Zeta.
And beyond.
Please welcome to Aircheck, Gregg Steele.
Thank you. Thank you. Quite gracious. Very kind. You're all beautiful. Thank you.
Gregg, you and I crossed paths in Miami back in '99. I was interviewing with you for the PD gig at Big 106, Miami's classic rock. Needless to say, you didn't hire me, but I'm glad you didn't because, you know, my path would not have been paved the way it did if you had. So thank you. We want to talk to you about your time in Miami, but the City of Angels comes to mind. You know, when you look back at the history of modern music, it seems that every decade gives birth to its own identity. And at times that movement becomes somewhat of a revolution. And in the early 90s, you were right there in the middle of one of the most prolific emergences and in one of the cities where it was happening. You were the program director at the legendary KNAC in L.A. Los Angeles, always on the cutting edge of the music scene, from Guns N' Roses, Van Halen, Motley Crue, Jane's Addiction, Red Hot Chili Peppers, Rage Against the Machine, Tool, and, you know, that list could go on. But it was the advent of this new sound from Seattle called grunge that was forcing its way into the hard rock vibe in L.A. L.A. bands like Metallica were facing the angst of Nirvana. So talk a little bit about that scene and how the rivalry of those two genres went head to head.
Yeah, it was really kind of an interesting place to be at a very interesting time. As you said, the reality of place that I was at came on the forefront, creating awareness on the radio for heavy metal and heavy metal bands. Prior to 1991, outside of some version of the song One based on Metallica's video presence on MTV, there really wasn't a place you could hear Metallica on a commercial radio station. And that was, you know, core band for us. But we were also about Slayer and Iron Maiden and Testament and, you know, all kinds of things that would virtually never get touched, even post that period of time on terrestrial radio, which wasn't even a word back then or a term. Unfortunately, we were sort of faced with a decision when the advent of the grunge thing started to happen. We're like, well, what do we do? Do we play this stuff? Do we embrace it? Well, let's see. We played Soundgarden. They had a couple of early, late 1980s records. There were a couple of other hard-based bands that were in the universe of Black Sabbath from a grunge guitar, loud noise perspective. And when you think about the alternative landscape at the time, specifically in Los Angeles, it was very synth. It was very keyboards. It was very Depeche Mode. It was very Cure. It was not guitar-based. And if it was guitar, it was light, jangly stuff. There was not a lot of heavy chords. So when Alice in Chains record came out with Man in the Box, that really sort of opened things up and made us sort of identify with the idea that this music is actually very powerful with hard rock kids. I mean, it was really Soundgarden. Didn't have great success with Louder Than Love, but as we went forward, it became like, well, we really need to embrace this. And our competitive landscape in LA was K-Rock.
106.7 K-Rock on Friday night here with a poor man. And that was EMF doing Unbelievable. Also Devo before that, Whip It Good, for all you guys who aren't going to have dates on this weekend. And anyway,
which wasn't the powerhouse it became at that time, and pirate radio, which got a lot of media attention, but really didn't do an awful lot in the market. KNAC was an under-signaled radio station, but had a lot more penetration from a brand perspective than either of those radio stations at that time. So we were like, well, what do we do? We really should embrace this music. And Brian Schock, who was my music director, he and I were trying to decide, these records had come out, both a Nirvana record and a Pearl Jam record. And we didn't know which one we wanted to play. We felt we couldn't play both of them. So we played a little pop-shot basketball in the office and decided whichever one of us sunk the most shots, their record would go in. And I had Pearl Jam and Brian had Nirvana. I beat him. So the notion was we'd add just the Pearl Jam. We decided to add Nirvana too. And it really was about 6 or 7 weeks later before KRXX started playing some of these songs. There was an event that used to happen up in Northern California called Day on the Green. It was a big festival in Oakland.
I'm Kurt Loder. Welcome to the big Day on the Green Festival here at Oakland Stadium in the heart of the San Francisco Bay Area. It's a beautiful day and it's a pretty great bill too. Over the course of the next hour, we're going to be hearing from Soundgarden, Faith No More, Queensryche, and topping the bill, Metallica, back in their hometown at last. These three shows have been going on, promoted by Bill Graham since 1973 when Led Zeppelin kicked things off.
And a bunch of us went up, and I was sitting with Louis Largent, who was a music director at KROC at the time. And, I virtually had to convince him he needed to be embracing this style of music because we'd already seen some great success. But, we were a limited low-watt radio station, and we took a chance, and we really made some great relationships and forged a path that we felt was where the future of hard rock music was going because of bands like Poison and Warrant and Winger that we had embraced initially. They were pop music that were flavor of the moment and were falling by the wayside. And we needed to have something to go forward with without just being Testament. And, 1991 was a very big year for music. You'd Soundgarden, Pearl Jam, Nirvana, Chili Peppers record was exploding. Smashing Pumpkins had released a record. Metallica's Black album came out and nobody was really playing Metallica. This is until the song Enter Sandman landed on people's desks at radio stations and they started playing that song. We anticipated the album was going to be obviously very huge, but we had this long-standing relationship with Metallica for being the only people that played them for forever and ever.
About Metallica, when the Black Album came out, KNAC put on a promotion at a record store, and that promotion and you on the air made it in on one of Metallica's home video releases, right?
So the clip that you're talking about appears in they did a documentary. It was a home video. It's called A Year and a Half in the Life of Metallica, I think.
It is an incredible record, and you're going to hear that when you pick it up, man. We've been playing it all weekend here at KNAC, and it's going to continue in your face, Southern California. Here in the store, it's kind of almost pandemonium.
Anyhow, so I was there because it was a Sunday night in store at Tower Records on Sunset in Los Angeles, or Hollywood, I guess. I lived closer to Hollywood than any of the other DJs. They all lived in Orange County because the station's studios were in Long Beach. And as I mentioned before, we didn't actually pay very good money. So jocks made their money on gigs and things. So I lived the closest. Nobody wanted to drive up on a Sunday night to do an in-store. And I'm like, fine, I'll do it. Someone's got to do it. So I drive up to Tower and calling back into the station to just tell them, hey, man, there's lines wrapped around the building. People are here buying this new album. It's really great.
Explain what an in-store is.
So back in the old days, there were stores that sold records. There was a building where people would go to and they would buy their music and they would take it home and they would listen to it. So when bands had specifically important bands would have a new release, their record company would work with the retailer to create an in-store, whether the band would show up or there'd be a special buy it at this time and you get a special deal. They would create these events to try to boost sales. And so we had an in-store event at that Tower Records, which is like the landmark Tower Records store for the rock scene. Actually, it was probably the biggest Tower Records in the country, I think, or at least the most prominent. Tower was a West Coast based company, and ultimately it was a bunch of metalheads couldn't get there fast enough, couldn't get that record first, and we as a radio station we were asked to be there by the record company and by the band. So it was great to be there. And I would rather not have been there. I didn't realize that they were going to be videotaping. I've got my dorky glasses on because I'm like, I don't know that I'm being filmed. I'm just going here to do a phone in to the radio station to say, come down and buy the record. It's on sale. Don't forget, we're having a big sale.
A landline phone.
Oh yeah. I know it sounds kind of kooky, but like I used to really well, first of all, I hated the sound of phone lines. And so I initially pushed back on it, but I changed my stance. I'm like, it sounds more urgent. It sounds like something important's happening. Now, if every break on a Saturday afternoon is, come on down, spin the wheel, you're going to win a big block of cheese, like on the phone, 4 times an hour, it gets a little terrible sounding. But for that, it was cool. And yeah, we picked up an actual landline and called in and said, I'm on the air now. Please come. And they did. They were there anyway. And there was a ton of great harder edged rock music that happened in 1991. And that was when I started at KNAC. So I was very fortunate to be a part of that scene. But wisely enough, the people I was surrounded with all agreed we needed to move in this direction. And that's how we went.
This is an Air Check Rewind. Season 1, Eddie Trunk.
Johnny showed up at the door unannounced with a bag under his arm. And I said, what are you doing here, man? What's going on? And he said to me, I got a band I need you to play. I need people to hear this band. I can't get arrested with them. I put my whole life on the line, my money on the line, my house on the line for this band. I need to tell them they got played on the radio. I was like, well, leave it. I'll check it out after you leave. I'll let you know what I think. And he goes, no, you don't understand. I need you to play it now. And I said, okay, what is this band? And the record he pulled out was Metallica, Kill 'Em All.
Air Check, a podcast about radio's personality from radio personalities. Seasons 1 and 2 available now on Apple Podcasts and Spotify.
That radio station, KNAC, you still see people wearing those T-shirts around the country. And the culture of that radio station lives on. A couple of examples. In 2014, the radio station wasn't even on the air anymore. It was inducted into the Rock Radio Hall of Fame in the Legends of Rock Radio Stations category. A couple years later, KLOS decides to host a birthday party salute to KNAC, and they block out 5 hours on a Saturday night. They bring all the jocks back. They put on the old production. They do the playlists.
KNAC. Do you remember those call letters? This is Stu. I've been behind the scenes at KLOS for the past few years, but you might remember me from the tiny station with the big attitude. Well, this weekend marks exactly 30 years that the Pure Rock format started, and we got the green light at KLOS for a KNAC salute. Saturday night, 7 to midnight. Join us old rock dogs as we reignite the loudest station in the nation. We'll have the DJs, the funny promos, celebrity guests, and obviously a ton of kick-ass rock you haven't heard on the radio in a long while. The KNAC
talk about the culture and the iconoclasty, is that where I'm going here, of that radio station?
Yeah, I mean, that's probably the best way I've heard it described. The station itself had a bigger shelf life than anyone would have expected. We were birthed because the owner of the radio station was a real estate guy in Los Angeles by the name of Fred Sands. And Fred had this radio station, which at the time he had bought, and was KNAC, which was, the format was Rock and Rhythm, which was an alternative-based format. Wasn't doing very well. And again, when you've got the numbers that the signal that the station had, it was not ever going to do gangbuster numbers, but they had a direct competitor with K-Rock, and they felt they had to seek alternatives to the programming that they had. And the station's city of license and offices were in Long Beach. And right down the road from where the radio station was a Long Beach arena. And in 1985, Iron Maiden sold out 7 shows in a row at the Long Beach Arena, which was 14,000 capacity, but nobody was playing Iron Maiden on the radio. So the owner of the radio station and the general manager actually convinced the owner, like, this is the format that we need to take on. And they did. And it never was great ratings. We barely popped over a 1.5 in the LA Metro. Wow. And that was only once or twice. But it was a radio station that had such fandom because it was music that you couldn't get anywhere else. The exclusivity of the music, it was something that people would fight for. It was something that people would ask for. When we started with satellite radio, it was, you didn't get it in the car. We didn't have the relationships with the auto manufacturers. You had to go to Circuit City, Best Buy, and ask for it. And the installer would be like, I guess this is it, right? I don't know how you put it in, but yeah. You had to create advocates. You had to create passionate fans. And that's one of the things that I think radio has kind of gotten away from, kind of, absolutely, totally. And that was why the station was as sticky as it was. It created hardcore fans. Didn't have a lot of them, but your question could be, do you want your core or do you want your cume? Probably can't have both. You want a little bit of both. You want to have a lot of one. And sometimes you have to have all or nothing. And this was a core radio station. It was definitely not cume based. So
yeah, for our podcast listeners that are not in the radio or record industry, we're saying a couple of things here that we have to put an asterisk on and describe. We're talking about an under-signaled radio station, which means the transmitter did not have the signal strength to cover the entire market, which was why you call it a low wattage radio station. And the cume and the core, you're talking about the percentages of the audience, the core listeners being the ones that, well, they slept in those black T-shirts that said KNAC on them, and the cume listeners, those are the ones that cruise down the dial and catch it from time to time.
Yeah, cume is like more casual. You could play any music on any place, but you were not a hardcore fan of the station. You might like some of the music. And if you're a core fan, you're just diehard for it. And you would do everything you could to get that wherever and however. And we had a lot of hardcore fans to the radio station because we embraced a style of music that they could not get anywhere else.
How did you get into this video? Heard it on KNAC.
It's another list of guests with their stories and audio from radio. Aircheck Season 1 has Neil Mursky's Van Halen in-studio nightmare and Keith Roth introducing Alice Cooper to Joey Ramone. Aircheck, a podcast about radio's personality from Radio Personalities. Season 1, available now on Apple Podcasts and Spotify.
The jocks that were there at the time that you were there, I mean, they had the attitude, they had the edge, they fit in perfectly with the music. Talk about some of the jocks that were on the air at the time.
So when I got there, the station had, as you said, some really great legendary air talent. And one of the things that happened in and around the time that I was there, pirate radio had come on, and they were a pop radio station playing top 40 music with a little harder edge because there was some hard edge music that was getting popularity. It didn't really take off the way they had hoped, and they decided to shift its focus away from being pop to more of a rock-based thing. So they had hired a lot of exceptional air talent in the pop universe, and sort of now we're going to import some credible rock hosts. And they hired our afternoon host, legendary DJ who's from the Bay Area, really. Her name is Tawn Mastery.
This is Tawn Mastery. Is she going to go on the air?
KNAC Pure Rock with Love Bites from Judas Priest, just eating that one alive, aren't you? Alice Cooper was before that with Be My Lover. Alice has a new album coming out, and it's supposed to be unreal. I can't wait to hear it. Got a lot of heavies playing out with it, too. And Warrant started the set off. Yes, they're flying up the charts. That 32 Pennies number is really taking off. If you want to take off and go see something, go look at
very, very well regarded. She was hired over to Pirate Radio, so we had to sort of start to continue to evolve our team. We had a gentleman by the name of Long Paul. He is actually still the day-to-day programmer of KNAC.com, which is doing real well on the internet. A handful of other guys. Dangerous Darren, who's still doing evenings on Hair Nation on SiriusXM. I brought a bunch of those folks over to satellite radio. Amazing talent. We had a guy who, just prior to me getting there, had been let go, but he was an exceptional night talent. His name is Gregg.
Gonzo,
who was a big part of the sort of rejuvenation of WMMR in Philadelphia as a night jock. He was huge talent.
Pure Rock 105.5 KNAC 712 Tuesday morning 12 after 7. Gonzo Gregg on the program, fired up. Tuesday, December 18th, Keith Richards' birthday today. In fact, Keith is in LA. Got Keith Richards' phone number right here. Call up Keith and wish him a happy birthday this morning. Keith Richards. Hopefully he's here. Good morning, Keith Richards.
This is Gonzo Gregg calling from KNAC here in Los Angeles. Keith, I just want to be the first to wish you a very happy birthday. 47 today. Any more transfusions lately? Well, if you stop smoking, Keith, you probably feel better. Keith, you went to the wedding with Mick. Mick Jagger just got married. How'd that go? What was that like?
Everything was down. And tough.
Yeah. Well, happy birthday, Keith Richards.
So when he left, we continued to evolve and hire other people. We hired this guy named Remy Maxwell, who ended up being, he's on in 15, 20 markets. He's been based in Minneapolis for a long period of time.
All right, got the Remy Maxwell banging a 2 for Tuesday. How was your Tuesday today? Anyway, you know what I actually did? I got out and went shopping. Not really domestic, but I went to a drugstore to get some rubber gloves. Came across a new product called Beano. Have you ever heard of Beano before? Beano. Supposedly cuts down on gas problems. I'm talking like flatulence. So, being the friend that I am, picked up a bottle for Long Paul. Right? 95.
And when KNAC was fast forward about to go off the air, when it was purchased by a Spanish broadcaster, KLOS hired Remy and Long Paul to become jocks on KLOS as they were trying to incorporate some of the KNAC fandom onto their radio station. That was about 95, I think. Yeah, 94, 95. Great talent, though. It was really, they were the difference makers. And the imaging of the radio station, the overall vibe of the station was really bigger than life.
For the past 10 years, KNAC has been a leader in rock music for all of Los Angeles and Orange counties. In recent years, KNAC has led the way in bringing you the new generation of supergroups and music like the Stray Cats, Berlin, Flock of Seagulls, and more. In each and every case, KNAC has been first. But according to some people, first has not been enough. There are those that at this very moment would change KNAC drastically. They say no one listens, that no one cares if KNAC lives or dies. I don't believe it. I know you don't. I know that Rock and Rhythm 105.5 KNAC will live forever.
Some rock here. Yeah, get a rim shot on it and stand back. This is Pure Rock 105.5 KNAC, Long Beach, Los Angeles. Wild Bill Scott. What else? Huh?
It was a hard sell to try to match the sonics of some of the music that was being played. So it was a really big experience, and one that I don't know it'll be replicated anywhere in the future. And if you missed it, you missed something pretty special.
True story of 105.5 KNAC. That's some damn good memories there, boy. Yeah, me and your grandma, we were part of that New World Order. Damn right. We survived 9 years of the pure rock evolution. Yes, sir. It's a shame, though. It all came to an end Feb 15th back in 1995. That's right, yep.
This is an Air Check Rewind. Season 1, Danny Bonaducci.
So I got him in the car, and we started going fairly fast, not as fast as I could, but pretty fast. And he kept saying things like, see? I mean, he looked scared. He goes, see, I'm not screaming. We come around the last loop, and there's some lady pushing a baby carriage, which I then hit. He starts flipping out, screaming, and he's out of his mind. At the time, it was my wife with a doll in the carriage.
Air Check, a podcast about radio's personality from Radio Personalities. Seasons 1 and 2 available now on Apple Podcasts and Spotify.
You eventually made your way to the East Coast Hollywood, the great city of Miami, Florida. But you first made a quick pit stop to a radio station where a year before you arrived, flipped to the hard rock format. Talk a little bit about the AM/FM combo, KRXX, 93X in Minneapolis. And were you there when the listeners called 911 because they thought the DJs were being held hostage? Do you remember that whole thing?
Yeah, I had just left during that time period. This is when it had been purchased by our competitor, and they were switching the format. So over the weekend, they were going from hard rock, active rock format to an alternative format, and they played It's the End of the World as We Know It from REM nonstop.
93X, Minnesota's pure rock. If it
rocks. It's 93 X.
I was living in Los Angeles, and it was a great experience. I enjoyed the time. I was very blessed to have the time at KNAC. The challenges with living in Los Angeles as a young adult. I wanted to get married at the time. The compensation wasn't in big dollars, and Los Angeles wasn't a cheap place to live. So that coupled with the riots that happened in Los Angeles, and not the greatest school system, and crime and graffiti and smog and traffic. It was like, maybe right now I've done what I've needed to do and been a part of something very unique, and maybe it's time to move someplace else. And I had an offer in my hometown of Minneapolis to take over a radio station that had been launched within the last year or so for Entercom. So I moved to Minneapolis to take that position. And when I left KNAC, I made sure that it was going to be in good hands. And Brian Schock, we imported back. He had left KNAC when I became program director. He wanted to get his own PD stripes, which is totally understandable. He moved out to Baltimore to WHVY, another heavy metal East Coast radio station, and then eventually was music director at Laser in WLZR in Milwaukee, and I convinced him to come back to KNAC so I could leave and feel good about where KNAC's future was. And moved to Minneapolis about 6 months into that situation. 3 months into being there, the guy that hired me, the general manager, was let go by David Field. David Field, who was the son of the owner of the company, Entercom, had just gotten out of Wharton College and was going to learn how to be a general manager. So he moved to Minneapolis and became the general manager. It was great. It was fun to watch him, learn and try stuff. And what he was really doing while he was learning how to do that was learn how to be a bigger player. And he engineered the sale of us underneath our noses to our competitor, who then immediately flipped our format to alternative to complement their juggernaut KQRS. And in the process of doing that, they in the format change, they took all the hosts away, put on this song, and made people wonder what was going on.
93.7 The Edge.
KEGE, Minneapolis, St. Paul, 100,000 watts, lasting from a 12-bay panel antenna high atop our 1,200-foot tower, overlooking a small pond in Shoreview. It's a really small pond. Sometimes it doesn't have any water.
It was a great time to be there. I love Minneapolis, and we weren't there long enough to make any real impact. And I got quality time with a guy who became a leader in the industry with David Field. So that was a good experience.
So when you left Minneapolis, I think it was early 94, did you head straight to Southern Florida, Miami, where you ended up being the regional director of programming for what became Clear Channel stations? Or was there a stop somewhere in between?
So when I left Minneapolis, when David Field sold the radio station to ABC Cap Cities at the time, or whatever they were called, I was not working. And KNAC had just gone off, just announced that they were going to go off the air. And they had basically, KLOS had hired these other hosts, Long Paul and Remy. And so now they had this huge gaping hole on a format that not that many people knew much about the music. Oh, by the way, I need to hire you, but really short term in Los Angeles with almost no money. Who wants that job? Nobody. So I told Brian, I'm like, look, I'll come back. I had nothing else going on. I'll come back and I'll do afternoons or middays. I don't know what it was. And until the station goes off. Yeah, I'd love to be there for the end of it anyway. So I moved back out to LA, spent like 6 months doing work on the air. So I was there for the final sign off of KNAC, which was great because Lars and James from Metallica came in and were in the studio with us for the sign off. And it was very powerful and impactful. And after that happened in February of 95, I was still looking for programming gigs, and I found a job opportunity in Miami. They hadn't yet let go of Neil Mursky, but they were going to, and they were quietly looking for somebody. And honestly, I found out later that I was like the fifth guy that they interviewed. I was like the last guy. They're like, I don't care. Didn't like that one. Didn't like that one. Didn't like that one. Just I'll take, if this guy takes the job, we'll hire him. I took it. And things went amazing from day one and just sort of snowballed. The company was called Paxson Communications. This fellow by the name of Bud Paxson, who created Home Shopping, the Home Shopping Network. He owned the station, started buying a small group of radio stations in Florida. So I started working with all of those stations. It was really an exceptional period of time. And then Bud sold the chain to Clear Channel. I did that, I think, for about 3-4 years. And then I just sort of kind of got soured on the whole concept of large ownership. And I don't know, I certainly can't blame iHeart, Clear Channel, the people that were making decisions back in 1999, 2000. They were trying stuff, and they were still trying to integrate the Clear Channel methodology with the guys from J-Core, which are like oil and water. So making those things fit, making the two different ownership styles work together was quite a challenge. And it didn't make for an easy time for a lot of us that were on the ground. At some point, they created little trade zones with Clear Channel. And so they had captains overseeing radio from the furthest I went out was Arkansas, Little Rock. And then I had a handful of stations down through the Keys. Oh, wow. What a tough assignment. So wait, non-rated market, a lot of sun, plenty of booze on the beach, and you got to go talk to them about how to rotate their records better. I'm like, yeah.
Tough gig. Yeah.
Pass me my flip-flops.
Yeah, exactly. It was like, how about if I come here more? It's close, so I'll just come here more regularly than going to Little Rock. Does that sound fair?
Big 106, obviously part of that cluster. Yep. And there was another rocker in Miami that you kind of touched on where Neil Mursky was, right? That was a big signal down there. What was it, Zeta?
So, yeah, I took over Zeta when Neil was at Zeta. And then when they hired me, there was the opening because they were going to make that change. But, Neil's got a long Florida pedigree. He goes back to ORJ in the early 70s. And, he was the program director at WSHE back in 1980. And he famously referred to the owner as root canal would be better than working for this guy.
He never told us that in his episode.
Well, he's got so many stories. Which one does he choose from? Yeah, he said that like working for John Tenaglia was like having a root canal every day. I never worked for John, but the Paxson bought WSHE, so I worked over there for a while as we were putting a staff together and putting a programmer in place.
Well, Big 106 was the Howard Stern affiliate at the time when you and I were talking, and Zeta had their own local huge morning show at the time. I'm trying to think. It was some
Paul Castronovo. Yeah, Paul Castronovo and Ron Brewer. They had Ron and Ron, which was a big thing in Tampa that they were syndicating down to Miami. And Paul and Ron were over on WSHE.
Oh, they were on She. Okay.
Yeah, Mursky hired them away from She and put them on Zeta. And eventually, over time, our goal was to get Paul and Ron over to Big and put Howard over onto Zeta. But, with the contract that Howard had, it was difficult to make a lot of things move. And Paul and Ron, Paul's there now. Ron is retired. Paul's back, still doing mornings on Big. He didn't want to go over there. To him, and a couple of the other jocks that we had on Zeta that were legacy hosts in the market for forever, they just did not want to move over to Big 106.
Are you dating someone?
Yeah, I am.
And do you ever go to his house before you go to your office?
Yeah, I've been there before. And I fix his bed. I've even shaved him before.
You shaved him? Yeah, give him a shave.
Yeah, I bake for him.
A lot of women, when a man urinates, will hold on to his
no, well, I haven't done that before.
Okay, you do have a saturation point, so to speak.
Yeah. No, but I think it's right. I mean, if you love
Have you ever wiped the man?
No, I haven't.
As a friend? Paul Castronovo and young Ron Brewer, weekday mornings on 94.9 Zeta.
Big 106, they viewed as a graveyard. They were like, but I'm contemporary. I'm still with it. I like this music. I'm like, well, but you can't talk about Steely Dan then. You can't talk about your love for REO Speedwagon and have credibility talking about, Weezer or whatever the hell was popular at the time. Like you got to figure out. We had one host, legendary, exceptional host in Miami named Kimba.
94.9. Oh, that's good. Zeta.
I'm addicted to Kimba.
What's a Kimba?
94.9 Zeta.
South Florida's real rock. 94.9 Zeta.
The project was called Operation Aerosmith.
Indeed it was.
Aerosmith knocked you up?
I could only wish. Goo Goo Dolls before that with Name. From Wither, Blister, Burn and Peel. Stabbing Westward. What do I have to do? 94.9 Zeta.
Kimba was on Zeta, but one of her programmers, and I think it was Mirsky, said she got to have a last name. Can't have somebody, some dictate came down, whether it was above Mirsky or whatever. It was like, you got to have a last name. Can't be just Kimba. Can't be Kimba. You got to be Kimba something. She loves Steven Tyler, talks about Steven Tyler every possible minute. She was like, I'm Kimba Tyler. I'm like, all right, you're Kimba Tyler. So I'm like, you love Steven Tyler. You talk nonstop about Steven Tyler. Don't you see what a perfect fit this is for you to put Big 106 on the map with music? Howard does not fit with classic rock anymore. We need to move him over onto the alternative station. And Paul and Ron, you can't talk anymore about, your favorite concert memory of seeing Steely Dan any longer and be applicable to kids. But they fought it like crazy. So that station took a long time to sort of get its feet, like many stations did outside of Howard Stern, and Miami's just a tiny pie for white dudes that like rock music. It's the market is made up of Miami-Dade and Broward counties. 65% of the market is Miami-Dade, 35% is Broward. And of that 65%, in that entire core of Miami-Dade, 85% of it is non-white. Mm-hmm. So if the biggest part of your market is nowhere near your universe, you have to be like we were talking with KNAC before. You had to super serve your core. You had to get the hardcore fans that liked this type of music. And those people were mostly in Broward County, which is Fort Lauderdale. So we spent more time on that. Because of that, there's only so much room to have more rock stations. There's still only one of them in Miami now. Miami's a big market, but it's not a big enough market to have two rock stations. And that's because of the demographics. So.
Air Check, some of radio's greatest stories from some of radio's greatest. Air Check Season 1 includes episodes with Danny Bonaducci, Nina Blackwood, Neil Mursky, Eddie Trunk, Cousin Ed, Keith Roth, and a pilot featuring your fearless hosts, Rich DeSisto and Paul Kelly. Air Check Seasons 1 and 2, available now on Apple Podcasts and Spotify.
And back in that day, Rich mentioned it earlier, he went to interview with you about getting hired down there at Big 106. And then a little while later in 2003, Miami, Clear Channel, you kind of put that in the rearview mirror, even as you mentioned before, terrestrial radio. And you went on to Sirius, which had not even merged with XM yet. And Howard Stern wasn't even there yet. So this new fledgling project, and you decide, I'm going to go do this thing. How did that decision get made in your head? And
when I left working for Clear Channel at the time, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I was pretty sure that radio was completely in my rearview mirror. I started working for Super Frank. There's a radio guy, or old radio guy, and wild entrepreneurial spirit by the name of Frank Kopsidis. And Mr. Kopsidis bought a bunch of stuff and ran a bunch of stuff. He had hotels, he had radio stations, he had TV stations. Anyway, young guy, he ended up owning a radio station in Augusta, Georgia. While he was owning that station, he befriended this fellow by the name of James Brown. And it is the James Brown. So Frank ends up managing James Brown. He hired this other radio friend of mine by the name of Howie Green to sort of be his road manager. And I stayed in the office working on song licensing and publishing. At the time, people hadn't connected the dots on song samples. Like you could just steal stuff from people like we've been doing for years and putting them on places, and we find out later about rights issues. But people would just like steal samples of James Brown songs and put it in their hip hop songs. Like he at one point was the most stolen sampled artist in the history of whatever. And one of the things that Frank did is he told Mr. Brown, because he was Mr. Brown, he was not James Brown, I will find all the money that's out there for you. So he hired me to find the money. So I would spend days and days and hours and weeks listening to and hunting down every possible hip hop song that could possibly have more than 8 bars of a James Brown song in it, and then going after people. At the same time, I was helping to create opportunities or investigate opportunities when there was some song licensing, Doritos commercial. There was a BMW film with Marilyn Manson as the pastor, and it was sort of a crossroads kind of short film.
It ain't easy to be James Brown and scare the kids. So you scare me, and I'm the Prince of Darkness.
Oh, I feel good.
Which explains my visit.
Please.
I'm talking about a friendly wager.
I like a wager, but I like the concept of winner take all. What are you proposing?
Another soul for another 50 years. My driver, my minder, a link with the real world.
1, 2, 3.
Our original deal no longer stands. The aging process has lessened my ability to perform. I can't maintain my fame and fortune.
Another thing was like Frank Kupstidis was trying to help Mr. Brown become more profitable and try to show him ways that I'm sure why he got the gig is he told him he could come up with new revenue streams. And one of them was what I was doing with song licensing. But he was like, Mr. Brown, when we go out on the road, you got 2 sets of backup singers, got 2 drummers, you got 2 bass guitarists, 4 saxophone players. Like your overhead is killing us. Just cost wise, it's crazy. It's like, well, can't we just get you one of everything? It's like, no. Gotta have 2 of everything. Like, gotta have 2 of everything. Why? Well, somebody gets sick. If somebody gets sick, I'm pretty sure whatever town we're in, we could find somebody who can actually do a pretty decent Papa's Got a Brand New Bag, and save you the money. But like a lot of, older African-American artists had been stolen from for such a long period of time that they did their best to try to surround themselves with people that were in their family or in their units to make sure that they had money, and so he didn't need to keep paying these people as much as he did, but he did. He was very benevolent. He was a strange person, but he was a wonderful guy. And I don't think I would exchange that experience for anything.
That's cool. That
was a unique experience, but it was short-lived. It was sort of project basis. And then it was time to figure out what to do. I moved back to Montana. My parents had a small business, but they didn't know how to get it up and running in this newly digital age. So I moved out there to try to help him get that sort of up and running. And while I was there, some headhunter found me and said, would you be interested in interviewing for this job? And I'm like, no, I don't want to move to New York. I don't know what this is satellite radio? Is that like XM? They're like, no, we're Sirius. I'm like, I know, but I think I know what you are. But my dad was like, look, you're 40, you're turning 40. You do not want to spend your entire life in Montana because 40 becomes 50, becomes 70. And once you help me out, I don't know what else is going to happen in your career opportunities. Like you're going to regret not taking a chance on this fledgling, burgeoning, unique, weird opportunity living in New York City and give it a try. And if it fails, it fails. I'm like, okay, good idea. So I moved to New York. I was hired to oversee the classic rock stations at the time, and is fairly has been the case prior to where we're at right now. But early adopters tended to be white, middle-aged men. And they were the guys that would seek out new gadgets. So the gadget guys with music were middle-aged white guys. And we were, the company was developing relationships with the car companies so that you would automatically get it as a trial sample, as is the common delivery method now. But those were also middle-aged white guys buying new Fords or whatever. They needed to fix the classic rock stations first. Meanwhile, when they pitched me on it, they're like, look, I know you don't think we know what we're doing because we didn't roll out great, but our plan is this. We're going to get the NFL. We're going to go after baseball. XM has it. We're going to go after NASCAR. XM has it. We're going to go after Howard Stern. We're going to do all of these things. And I was like, wow, you guys are aggressive. And they got everything but baseball. It was a wonderful time to be at that platform because we were learning new things and trying new things. And so I moved to New York and quickly started dealing with the rock formats. And then I was overseeing half of the music platform. Another fellow named Kid Kelly was overseeing the other half. He and I would bounce between, all right, you do the jazz, I'll do the Latin. I got the country, you got the R&B. And then eventually, over time, the merger took place with XM.
XM and Sirius are the only 2 companies licensed to provide satellite radio service in the United States, and they're trying to merge.
Vigorous, unimpeded competition sustains our economy and keeps it strong.
The House Judiciary Committee wants to know what's in it for the consumer. 5 witnesses testified before the committee's newly formed antitrust task force today, including Sirius satellite radio CEO Mel Karmazin.
We are absolutely convinced that this merger is in the consumer's best interest. This merger will give people more choice than they have before, and lower prices, and very importantly, less confusion.
Karmazin says satellite radios already purchased will not be obsolete. He says the merger will lead to more programming and allow the companies to compete with other technology like iPods and internet radio. Opponents worry it will create fewer choices and higher prices.
So Sirius ended up acquiring XM, and, XM got off to a much better start than Sirius by a long shot. But when you really break it down, the content between the two companies were wildly diverse, the way that we programmed the stations. And that was by design. XM had we'll play everything under the sun. Everything that you don't hear on FM, we'll play. And we were like, not so much that. We're like, we want something that's like FM, but with a little bit more surprise element. But it can't be, I don't know this one. I don't know this one. I don't know this one. I'm not going to pay for this. And that's ultimately what happened. We sort of had a different philosophy, and that philosophy is the one that won out when the merger happened. They kept the programming team from Sirius, and from XM, it was mostly the engineering side, the marketing team, because XM did an exceptional job of marketing themselves. One of the best things about what XM ever did was the way they presented what this new medium was. There would not have been Sirius if XM hadn't been so aggressive, because if XM was as lame as Sirius was when they first rolled out, neither one of them would have worked. So XM gets a ton of credit, and the pioneers that were over there. But anyway, so the merger happened, and they had to blend the programming teams as best as they could. And they jettisoned the head of music programming, which for Sirius, which is a fellow by the name of Steve Blatter. And they had already lost most of the XM people because they knew a merger was coming. It took a long time for it to close. So they kind of neatly created parachutes for lots of people. And many people just jumped out of the plane and took their chute and left. So there weren't a lot of upper management folks left in the programming side, but there was one guy. And so they said, guess what? You're it. You're in charge of music programming, because we had to have somebody from your side managing it. So John Zellner was the guy, and Zellner lasted about 8 months. And then he just didn't dig the vibe and has been thriving in his role with iHeartRadio, overseeing a bunch of stuff there.
At that point, you were well on your way in the SiriusXM journey. You survived the merge. The synergies were being established, as you explained, and obviously the company was looking to grow. How are you feeling about things? Were you having fun? Were you enjoying yourself? Did you acquire new responsibilities with the expansion? I mean, a guy with your radio pedigree had to have been a big asset to them.
I moved to D.C. as part of the merger. D.C. facilities are phenomenal. They were really well built, super smart. Like I said, there's a lot of things that they did very, very well, way better than the Sirius team. But there was nobody running it because everybody jumped out of the plane. So I moved to D.C. and sort of oversaw the aspects of content from the DC side, as well as whatever other formats besides rock that I was overseeing at the time. That was a wonderful experience. I mean, I don't know how to quantify that better than to say, I had such amazing times creating and developing content in a different way than we'd done before, because number one, there was no commercials. Number two, there was no ratings. So we were only beholden to our subscribers, and our biggest metric for us as programmers was our churn rate. So we were not about acquiring listeners. We were all about retaining listenership. And so the content that we created had to make people say, not, I don't know it. I guess I'm not going to pay for it when my free trial runs out. Because, by this time, 2008, 2009, Circuit City went out of business. Best Buy was starting to become much smaller in its footprint. All the places where you would get aftermarket products for satellite radio were no longer as important. And at the same time, our relationships were maturing with all of the car companies to where there's 75% now of every new car rolling off the lot has satellite radio already prepaid in it. So we already have them. We just got to not lose them. And so our goal was to create content that would allow for more content retention rather than the acquiring of new people. So that was kind of a unique way to sort of devise programming, and every station was different. We did a ton of research. It was a very great time. I was also in charge of all of the special projects. So like when there'd be a artist channel or a big event that we would have, like we did McCartney, a free show with Paul McCartney at the Apollo Theater. And then we did a couple other ones. We did Springsteen at the Apollo. We did bunches of other ones. So I was in charge of making sure the content side of that all went right. I'd spend weeks at a time with whoever the hell it was, a week with this celebrity in their house gathering content. It was just a very unique life experience. Again, to me, it's just like, it's all about great life experiences. And that was one that I really, really relished. Ultimately, Los Angeles, they've been asking me for years, would you go out to LA? We need to do what you did and help us with LA like you did with DC. I'm like, yeah, I don't really want to. But by that time in my head, I was like, I'm kind of fed up with this lifestyle. Like I was on the road 2 or 3 times a week, and it would be like, hey, guess what? It's, did you unpack your bag? You didn't. Okay, good. Because you're going to Austin in 5 hours and you're going to be there for your event with Bob Seger. And here's your prep material and figure it out. I'm like, okay, well, great. So like, in addition to my other responsibilities, it just got to be too much for me. And I was like, I'm going to volunteer out of this, but I didn't tell him that. I was like, okay, I'll move to LA. In the back of my head, I'm just planning for my own change. So that was my time in Los Angeles for them. And since then I've moved to South Carolina, and I'm wearing a tie-dye sweatshirt middle of the afternoon.
More of this AirCheck session is next. Are you ready to tell some stories from the studio and beyond? We'd love to hear them. Email aircheckme@gmail.com to join Rich DeSisto and Paul Kelly on AirCheck, a podcast about radio's personality from radio personalities.
I'm curious, while you were at SiriusXM, were you aware of the impact that satellite radio had on terrestrial radio? I mean, Free FM was born to counter the subscription-based service of satellite radio. HD radio was supposed to be, the better sounding quality compared to the satellite feeds. And when Howard Stern joined Sirius, January of 2006, the previous year, terrestrial radio allowed him to give free promotion to satellite radio during his morning show. I mean, it really became a big thorn, and I wonder if you recognize that from the satellite side.
It's hard to really say because we saw and heard a lot of things, but most of the stuff, it's kind of like if you have an ex and you're like, yeah, I don't know what they're doing. I don't really care. Whatever. Oh, she's dating a football player. Okay, well, whatever. But she's dating a football player and you know everything about what's going on, right? But you're acting like you don't. But yeah, we kind of got the impression that we had a lot of impact. And with the partnerships that we had, or the relationships that we had with providers, or in whatever shape or form they were, would be like, I'd love to tout that you guys are the reason that this band has gone from 0 to 1 million. But if I do, then I'm not going to get WXYZ because they're going to see, oh, satellite radio must have done it, huh? Well, I guess you don't need us anymore. So there was a lot of that pushback that we never got the full awareness of what kind of impact. We certainly felt it. We had a very strong indication that there were, movements happening within that universe. But, when you do break it down, it's still a small piece of the pie. The amount of people that actually still listen to the radio that we're saying terrestrial, is significantly dwarfs all of the other audio delivery devices. Now, that's not going to continue to be that way based on lots of things that are happening, but it'd be great if it did. I would love it if deregulation would. I would love it if the FCC finally said, you know what? You can't have 8 radio stations in each market, and you need to sell it to mom and pop, because mom and pop don't need a 50% multiple in each market to be able to tell their shareholders that they're doing a good job. All they need to do is 15% more money every year, and they put that in the pockets of their employees, and they actually invest in the community, and the radio station becomes profitable. And it can happen, and it will happen, because one day I envision, this is just my own weird myopic view, but all of the big players in the universe of terrestrial radio are so busy selling their frickin' internet delivery system. It's like their sticks are irrelevant. So like, why don't they sell them before they've devalued them? They're busy devaluing their own sticks by saying they're basically not important because they're busy pushing their online whatever. Like, stop that nonsense. Sell them because they're profitable, because they're valuable. And the more you talk about how they're not valuable, the less money you're going to get. If you sell them to mom and pop, and they'll pay a premium for them for today, because they will still make more money per radio station now than you guys are ever making with what you're doing. That's my hope and dream. Thank you.
Well, a tip of the hat to your dad for giving you the nudge to go from Montana to New York into satellite. Many of us who got into radio, our parents rolled their eyes when they heard we were going into radio. You get paid for this? Is this really what you think you should be doing? And
right.
Montana, where you from, where you started, we all got bitten by the radio bug in a different way. Do you want to mention the first call letters you worked for and how you got bitten by the bug?
So the way I got started in broadcasting, I got interested when I grew up in Minneapolis. All my friends in the mid to late 70s were getting into FM radio because they liked prog rock. They liked all the 12-minute Genesis and Yes songs that I hate. And I'm like, why do you like this crap? This is terrible. I'm a power pop guy. I like rock music that is short and powerful and fun.
You just didn't smoke enough pot.
That's probably it. That's probably definitely it. So, but my friends were all like, you gotta, and I'm like, no, I do not like the radio. But I found an AM radio station in Minneapolis that their FM sister was a disco station. The AM station was KRSI, and it was a punk rock station. New wave, alternative punk rock in 1978, 79.
Wow.
This is KRSI AM and FM stereo, a service of Roy H. Park Broadcasting. KRSI FM operates on 104.1 megahertz with a power of 52,000 watts vertical and horizontal. KRSI AM at 950 kilohertz with 1,000 watts.
And it was like, oh my God, this speaks to me. This is music that I can't hear anywhere else. Getting back to that core concept, I like really was drawn to this because nowhere else. It was like my best friend. I would come home from school, turn it on, leave it on all night, listen to it in the morning. It was like I had this new companion, my little clock radio in my room. And one morning I turned it on and there was like classical music playing. I'm like, what in the hell? I called up the DJ and he's like, sorry, kid, I got to go. It's the first day of the new format. And I'm like, format? What's this format nonsense? So like basically my best friend moved away in the middle of the night without telling me. And it was very impactful. So I went to college, went to a tiny little college in the Fargo, Moorhead area. If you guys know that area, I went to Concordia College in Moorhead, Minnesota, which river runs between Minnesota and North Dakota, or it would be also part of Fargo. So I went to school there and I volunteered at the college radio station because I wanted to learn how it is that a format could impact a person's life and how a change like that is decided upon. So I was like, all right, well, I'll do this. And I volunteered at the college radio station and I got on the FM station. Prior to that, when I was in Montana, so I was in Minnesota, my senior year of high school, and moved to Montana. So after hearing KRSI, the punk rock station in Minnesota, and it disappeared, I moved to Montana and there was a local radio station. It was a daytimer AM. And I went in and volunteered to help, cart music up and change the big reels. And they hired me to do basically nothing. But I felt like I was learning something. And that's what got me down the path to eventually get into college. And then when I was there, they made me the program director within a few months because I was like, I can do it. I'll lift that box. No one else will do it. I'm the fifth guy. I'm the last guy. I'll do it. I've been very beneficial. My career has benefited greatly by being around and being available and being, not the first and not the best, but the most dogged in pursuit. I've always wanted to be the first guy in and the last guy out. Sounds cliche, but like that's how I work. It was important for me to, never stop trying to do something that motivated me. If that's any advice that I can give is never think that you have to be first. Someone's going to win the race and it's not always the front runner. There are a lot of reasons why decisions get made. And sometimes you don't know why, whether you are the benefactor of that decision or not, but know that your opportunity will come if you keep asking for it and then make the most of it when you get it.
Now your time in the Midwest, I mean, in the plains from Montana, you headed east to Fargo and became the music director at KQWB 298.
Yeah.
And then the PD Stripes came along.
Grand
Forks, North Dakota. Tell us about that.
I was a terrible DJ, and which is why I got into management. But I was doing late nights. Like the shift was 9 p.m. to 1 a.m. And as I said before, I was always wanting to be the first one in and the last one out. I was a music director, so I'd be there at 9 o'clock in the morning. And then when I was done with my air shift at 1 in the morning, I would probably go and do production, recording commercials and things. And then I'd go home and turn it around and do it again. And it was tiring, and I was missing out on all the really great friends that I met and in Fargo. I was really actually met lifelong friends there. So I wasn't really getting to be social. It was taxing on me. And then afternoon show came open, and they hired somebody who I personally determined when I was 22 years old that he was terrible and I deserved the job, and I was mad. And so I was like, screw it. I'll move to Grand Forks. I got an offer to be a program director. Grand Forks, North Dakota is about 70 miles directly north of Fargo. So I could still see my friends, and I got this new great opportunity. Well, lo and behold, 3 months after being hired, there was turned into a country format. They turned out later that it was some sort of smoke screen to hire somebody to make it look like we're staying in the format while they were actually changing formats. So I got the heads up that we were changing formats. And so I started looking around for work, and I was fortunate enough to get the opportunity to work weekends and swing at KGB in San Diego. I'd been pestering Pam Edwards and Ted Edwards, and they were like, fine, if you're here on Monday, you have the job. And I'm like, loaded up my truck, I drove all the way across the country, ended up in San Diego. I'm like, knock, knock, knock. And he's like, who are you? I'm like, I'm the guy you said if I'm here by blankety blank, I'll get the job. And he's like, oh, crap.
You thought we were serious?
Right. And I don't think he even listened to my tape. You know, Pam probably listened to it and said, he's a little green, but we need a body. And Ted was like, I don't even want to deal with this guy. So ultimately, they hired me, and Pam ended up taking the job at KNAC, and then I became the music director at KGB. And then Pam left KNAC, and then I replaced her at KNAC.
San Diego, 1980. Did you know anything about the San Diego chicken and the lawsuit?
Way back when a local radio station, KGB, hatched this chicken as a promotional stunt, who would have thought that today he would have ended up in court facing a judge who could order his feathers be plucked? At sporting events, costume chicken Ted Giannoulis was a long-running hit. But last year, his salary demands, hardly chicken feed, infuriated the station's management, and Giannoulis was fired. The station replaced him with another young man in a chicken costume, but Giannoulis kept on performing, his antics underwritten by other sponsors. That really made KGB mad, and they took Giannoulis to court to try to stop him. But his attorneys compared his outfit with that of the new KGB chicken, arguing there were differences.
The KGB chicken, as defined in the injunction, is red. The color on Mr. Giannoulis' creation is orange.
And the defense lawyer continued, his sad eyes and cuddly body are a unique asset to this community. KGB's lawyer countered the chicken image belonged only to the station. The judge today, not apologizing for his pun, pronounced he would put the matter to rest. He ruled the costumes were substantially different, and thus that Giannoulis could continue his career.
I was a huge fan of the chicken, so I knew of it, but I didn't know about the lawsuit. And then one day I was working, I was doing weekends and swing shift stuff. So I was working one Saturday night or afternoon or something, and I had to run in the production room for some reason, and some little dude was in there, a little guy with his little mustache, and he was like, how's it going? I'm like, I'm good. Who let you in? What are you doing here? And he's like, I made up all this stuff. And I'm like, he's like, my name is Ted. I'm like, okay, I don't know what. So turns out it was the San Diego chicken. They had disassociated themselves with at some point because of he wanted to be able to represent the chicken outside of the radio station. And the radio station said, we own the chicken. And he said, no, I am the chicken. He ended up becoming San Diego's famous chicken or something and stopped being the KGB chicken. But they still had a good relationship. So he was working in the production studio one day, and I met him and I was like, "You're that guy?" Because that guy is all animated and fun, and you're kind of nerdy. And, sometimes it takes all types. He becomes the chicken and he's a whole nother person. So it was a nice place to be. And San Diego is a wonderful community. And if I could afford to live there, I'd probably live there now.
This is an Air Check Rewind, Season 2, Fred Jacobs.
We really had a lot of fun. I mean, back then, the radio station was very much a reflection of who you were as a person. When I programmed in Detroit, there were really 4 rock stations, and that was the case in a lot of markets. I mean, Philly was like that. Chicago was like that. Big markets had 3 or 4 stations that were all kind of similar in that they played rock and they had personalities. So you really had to be a great radio station to stand out and win in that environment.
Air Check, a podcast about radio's personality from Radio Personalities. Seasons 1 and 2 available now on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or Google Podcasts. You can also listen on your smart speaker. Just say, "Alexa, play Air Check Podcast," or "Okay, Google, play Air Check Podcast."
Yeah, one of the other great things that you did along your way, Gregg, was working with legendary syndicated rock radio interviewer, Bob Coburn. I mean, talk about your transition from San Diego to working on that show in the early 90s.
One of the legends of my broadcast career that I've looked up to was the smooth, smart Bob Coburn. I ran the Rockline show when I was a DJ on the air in Fargo, and I just marveled at his skill set. And 3 years later, I'm living in Los Angeles. Pam Edwards and I were an item, and she was in Los Angeles, and I'd been split in time doing the KGB thing. But she was like, if we're gonna do this, you need to move here. So I'm like, ugh. I'm not gonna be able to chase this dream at KGB. So I quit. I moved up to LA, and I found work for Mark Felsot, who's with SiriusXM and runs the Tom Petty channel now. And Mark was looking for a associate producer. He was the main producer, and I interviewed and he hired me. I probably learned more in the short time I worked with Bob. Since working with Bob, at satellite radio, I've worked with the Pat St. Johns and the Carol Millers and the Meg Griffins and Dennis Els's, all the legendary New York DJs. But Bob Coburn helped me sort of understand how to be such a larger than life personality and treat an interview the way it really needs to be treated. He treated each interview like a person. So he didn't overthink it. He did a voluminous amount of prep, but he really just didn't bring it forward until he had to. A lot of times people, now you guys are pros at this, so you understand.
No, actually, we're in school right now. Keep going.
But you're doing a wonderful job. And a lot of times interviewers, and I've done this myself, they ask all the questions hoping for the answer that they think they want. But instead, it's not that they ask open-ended questions, but they make it more of a conversation and a dialogue. And then they'll dive bomb in with more specifics to drill down if they need to. But the interview can go in all kinds of different places. And I saw Bob do that better than anybody I've ever worked with. Not to mention the fact, I don't think I ever saw him pissed off. Maybe once I saw him a little unhappy because his wine glass hadn't been filled to his liking. But otherwise, he was an amazing guy to be around, to watch how a show should be executed. And he was smooth and effortless as he sounded. I know he put a lot of work into making it seem that way, but that was the kind of guy he was. I mean, just really was an effortless person. So again, when I look back at all the unique life experiences, being a part of the Rockline show, for those of us that were fans of rock radio and great talent, to have the behind the scenes opportunity to sit down and do show prep with Bob Coburn was pretty amazing.
Yeah, it truly is an art. And as you know, all your years in the business, in the industry, some of the performers can be children, and it can become a challenge for an interviewer to corral some of these folks. And I'm sure you may have seen one or two of those along the way.
Yeah, it's funny, though, when you see it done well, you're amazed at how effortless it is. It's like watching Patrick Mahomes throw a football. He looks like he's just out there on a sand lot doing these little wingedy weird passes. And it's like, no, he actually practiced all of that. He learned all of that. This is not just made up. I mean, it may look that way, but he has made that goofy throw a billion times. My friends are like, why don't you need to go to the driving range? I'm like, because Tiger Woods goes to the driving range. I'm like, no, he doesn't. He's just like, yes, he does. Do you know that Michael Jordan shot more free throws after practice than any other player on the Chicago Bulls basketball team? It's because he put in the work. And that's why he looked like he was so effortless, because when it was crunch time, it was baked in. To learn that kind of effortlessness takes a ton of time and attention. And Bob was probably the best I've seen.
Any remarkable moments you'd like to share with us from your time working with Bob and Rockline?
Well, I had a great weekend. It was my birthday weekend. And Paul McCartney had just put out it was called Tripping the Live Fantastic album. And Bob was super excited. He was like, I got to go get another bottle of wine. Hang on.
And once again, welcome back to Rockline. I'm Bob Coburn with Paul McCartney. Time to hit the phones for your calls. And I know we have many of them, so let's hit the phones immediately. We have John from New York City. John, welcome to Rockline. Here's Paul.
Hello, Paul McCartney.
Hey, John. How are you?
Fine. Pleasure to be speaking to you. And here's my question. What inspired the All-Star Rockestra recording session in 1979, and how was it working with all these high-profile musicians all in one recording session?
It was great fun. It was really brilliant. What happened was...
So I had to go in and talk with Paul. It was during Hey Jude, which was like 12 minutes on the album. And Paul was like exhausted. He'd been doing press all day. The show was done at nighttime. And I was like, go in to see, can I get you a new glass of water, Mr. McCartney? And he was like, not unloading, but he was not being, hey, I'm Paul McCartney. I'm very happy. Everything's good. Yeah. He was like, oh, and he was like, venting, but like in a positive, normal person kind of way, like, oh, I'm so exhausted, this and that, and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, I had a real 12-minute dialogue with Paul McCartney. I felt like, oh my God, these people are amazing and real. And as time goes on and in my career, I found that the bigger the star, the cooler they were. The ones that were on their way down or on their way up were the biggest jerks. But that was on we did a special edition of Rockline because it was Paul McCartney, and that was on a Friday night. Monday was my birthday, and we had Robert Plant.
Once again, welcome back to Rockline. It's an evening with Robert Plant. Phil Johnston is with us as well from the Robert Plant Band. I'm Bob Coburn. Next phone call from Temple City, California, listener of 95.5 KLOS. I recognize this name. This is Tort Elvis. Elvis, how are you?
I'm doing very well. How you doing?
Doing good.
Tort Elvis.
Hey, is that Robert Plant?
Yeah, is that you?
That's me.
How you doing?
I'm doing very well.
For those of you that may not know, Tort Elvis is the lead vocalist for Dread Zeppelin.
My blue moon turns to gold again.
And he found out it was my birthday. So Robert Plant sang me happy birthday. Just personal a cappella to me. Had nothing to do with the show. But just before the show, he sang me happy birthday, which was pretty amazing. And then after the show, he and I went out to the Frolic Room, which is this hole in the wall bar, and had drinks on my birthday, just me and him.
So cool.
So it wasn't the show itself, but it was like the experience of being there that like made for a really unique, just another life experience. Like I have a million of those kinds of stories, and it makes me fulfilled in every aspect. I don't need to have the highest ratings. I don't need to have the statue of what great accomplishments I've had, but it's because of all of the unique life experiences that make me more appreciative of every day I have on this planet. So,
Gregg, thank you so much for being part of Aircheck Season 3. It's been a pleasure spending this time and hearing your stories. You've had a remarkable radio career, and I wish you nothing but success in your retirement ventures on stage and on film, and looking forward to seeing one of those films soon.
Guys, I really appreciate you having me on. Continued success. And let's go Eagles.
Gregg, that was amazing. Thank you, sir.
That was pretty amazing. Gregg Steele. He's just a cool, down-to-earth guy.
You can't fake that. Don't ask me how I know.
Aircheck Season 3, just getting started with more surprises to come. Programmers and air talent from country radio, record label reps, rock radio, and a top 40 emperor from 1960s AM radio.
You can stream or download every episode of Aircheck on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify. You can also tell your smart speaker to play Aircheck Podcast. If you haven't done so yet, give us a great rating.
This is Rich DeSisto.
And I'm Paul Kelly.
We'll talk to you soon.
Closing out another episode of AirCheck, a podcast about radio's personality from radio personalities. If you have radio stories to share, we'd love to hear from you. Join the AirCheck guest list. Email aircheckme@gmail.com. Musical props are Chris Gordon's. Announcer props, I'll take those. Greg O'Brien, the OB. AirCheck is available now on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify. You can also tell your smart speaker to play AirCheck Podcast. AirCheck is the creation of RDPK Productions.